Welcome into Season 2 of Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, along with Maren Angus Combs, the contributing softball writer for Husker Max. I'm Nate Rohr, the play-by-play voice of Nebraska softball, and you can hear my voice isn't exactly 100%. Call it the Playing Hurt edition of Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate, although considering last year when my sinuses were on fire for our first episode of this program, I'll take this over that. I got a little hot tea. I'm going to be okay. But, maybe it's appropriate that I'm playing a little hurt right now, considering all the injuries around Nebraska softball.
No kidding. I think we have to start with the obvious elephant in the room, which is Jordy Ball. The last time we spoke to you, we were talking about Jordy transferring to Nebraska, and the first game of the season, it just fell apart.
Yeah, Jordy pitching for Nebraska against the Washington Huskies, the matchup that we were all hoping for. Jordy Ball, the Papillion native, and the Papillion La Vista grad facing Ruby Malin, the Omaha native, the Omaha Sket graduate. And in the third inning, Jordy threw a pitch and seemed to slip, and her left knee popped. And the pitch went back to the screen. Jordy collapsed on the field right there, and her season ended 3 innings into the year. So one of the most anticipated seasons of Nebraska softball was immediately hamstrung.
Yeah.
By this injury to Jordy Ball. And it's disappointing and frustrating because it was very random. It was out of the blue. It's not, and it was doing something that she's done roughly 1 million times in her life, right?
Yeah, and honestly, it's not the first time I saw that happen in Puerto Vallarta. So just to be specific to that field, but it really, man, they were ranked in the top 20 in almost every poll. There's too many to count now. So we're just going to say almost every poll.
Yeah.
And the whole country was anticipating Nebraska to really have this shot at a World Series run with her in the circle, with the defense behind her, with the bats that they have. And you almost could feel like the wind was just taken out of the sails immediately. And I was watching on TV and I was just like, oh no.
Yeah. And I sitting there in Mexico watching it happen. I'm sure I was trying to give myself the best case scenario because this is something I've anticipated for 9 months now. And it was going to redefine what Nebraska softball is and what the program can do. And so for this season to end so abruptly for her in that way, I was in a little bit of denial. I saw her moving around down in Mexico, and I took that as a hopeful sign. But, I spoke with Jordy the day after, and I just asked what happened. And she said, well, I felt a pop. And at that point, I should have said, you know what? That's it. But I held out hope that when they got her back to Lincoln, maybe it would not be the severity of injury that it ended up being. So obviously it changes the season. We're going to talk plenty about that. We're going to chat with Amie Just, the lead sports columnist for the Lincoln Journal-Star. She had a great column soon after Jordy Ball's injury, dealing with it. And we'll also chat with Kaylin Kinney, whose role for the Huskers softball team has changed in a profound manner. She goes from being number 2 to number 1 and has a lot more spotlight and pressure on her. And then we'll wrap up chatting about the Big Ten. But back to the Jordy Ball injury. So much of the expectation of this program was Jordy's coming, Jordy's here. And I know coming into the year, we all felt like, well, that makes Nebraska a College World Series team. It's going to be the interesting story moving forward. How does this team deal with that change in expectations, at least externally? Now, internally, I'm sure they're hopeful that they can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, but it's got to be tough in that locker room, going from very realistic aspirations of going to Oklahoma City and competing in the Women's College World Series to now just trying to find your way through games. And you even saw that this past weekend in New Mexico. The Huskers ended up 4-1, but they were one hit by New Mexico State. The Aggies have a very good freshman pitcher, really a two-way player, Desiree Spearman, and she was good. Don't get me wrong, but you had the Jordy Ball out for the season news. Then the week of practice leading up to it, up to the New Mexico State tournament, you have the news about Billy Andrews going down with a concussion in a tag drill and being hit in the head and having to miss 4 games. And it just felt like the team was shell-shocked.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point with the loss to New Mexico State in the first game. But if we even go back to Mexico, they only beat Utah Valley 3-2.
Mm-hmm.
And against Washington and Duke, there was very little offense.
Yeah.
So even if Jordy was healthy, you still have to produce at the plate.
Yeah.
And they weren't doing that. Now, it's gotten a little bit better, but this weekend in California, they have to hit.
Yeah, the offense is going to be really challenged. And to that end, I'm not going to say I'll write off what happened against Washington and Duke, but there's an asterisk by that for me, again, because of the ball injury. And also because, those were 2 really good pitchers. Ruby Malin's an All-American.
Yeah.
And the pitcher for Duke pitched very well that day. One note on that Utah Valley game, and look, Utah Valley is who they are, but they played Washington to within 1 run. So I guess I was not as troubled by that. It wasn't the blowout win or the dominant win that you were hoping for, but I wasn't as troubled by that. Just how quietly that first game against New Mexico State went was maybe the first real red flag sort of game for me from the offensive standpoint, because again, while Desiree Spearman's really good and she'll have a terrific year, to only get 1 hit against her is worrisome. But there again, because of the Billy Andrews injury, put on top of the Jordy Ball out for the year news, you wonder where the team's mindset is. So I think the offense can be marked as a concern for now. And this week's going to be a big time test. Like you said, they're going to face great pitching. The San Diego State team that they opened with won a regional last year.
Mm-hmm.
UCLA has the elite talent that they normally have. And so you go from there. Oregon and Utah. Oregon won a regional on the road last year. Utah was a College World Series team, and they have Lopez back. So, it's a big ask this weekend. The one I'm going to tap the brakes a little bit on worrying, though, because even when Nebraska's healthy, even when Nebraska's good, it's tough for this team early in the season to play great competition because of the weather, because of having to acclimate to playing outside, picking up spin outside. It's tough. I think of the 2013 team that went to the College World Series. They went to the Mary Nutter and went 1-4, and they got hammered by Oregon. Well, they go out to Oregon and win 2 out of 3 games when it counts in the Super Regional. So while, yeah, you take what you can from the results and what happens, I will take it with something of a grain of salt for that reason, because Nebraska, being a northern school, tends to come on later.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand what you're saying, but I'm just, uh, I know Billy played the last game,
Mm-hmm.
so that's good because she is the leadoff hitter for this team. However, she cannot do it alone,
Right.
and I'm happy to see that Sydney Gray had an outstanding weekend. And she's almost matched last year's total in home runs, and she already has half of last year's totals in RBIs.
Mm-hmm.
So she is well on her way to having a solid season. She was named the Big Ten Co-Player of the Week for her performance, and I think her being more consistent is going to help. I also think I love Peyton Cody.
Yeah.
I really do. I was a little shocked to see her not play as much early on,
Mm-hmm.
but I think she's coming along, and I think she's a good addition to this lineup. She gives them another bat.
Yeah. She can hit. She
Yeah.
can flat out hit. I know there are some concerns about her injury history. They're a little that the fact that she's had some foot issues while she can't run. She can hit. She
Yeah.
can hit like crazy, and she's 7 for 12 on the year so far. And this is a lineup that needs that level of production because we touted this back in June. Jordy Ball was not only going to be the ace of the staff, she was also going to be a pretty useful hitter. Well, they don't have their ace, and they don't have somebody who's going to be in an important spot in their lineup for most of the year. But yeah, I think Sydney Gray's emergence is really important for this lineup. She's somebody that's going to have to be a power hitter in the heart of the order, along with Cody. That helps drive in runs. Brooke Andrews is another one that needs to get going in the heart of the order. So the fact that she ended the weekend as well as she did down in New Mexico, I think and I hope is a good sign for her, because if she can get going, then you've got a power bat to go with Billy Andrews and to an extent with Peyton Cody, because Peyton's hit, she hasn't hit for much power as yet. So you need somebody to drive him in. Sydney Gray can be that type of player. She's done that in her career. It's just she hadn't done it until essentially the second half of the New Mexico State weekend. So there are possibilities here for this team. It's just they need to emerge. They need to show themselves. The other part is Rhonda Revelle, in anticipation of having Jordy Ball, scheduled very difficult this year.
Yes,
She's scheduled with the RPI in mind. She's scheduled with the idea of hosting at least a regional, if not supers. Well, you can't change your schedule when you lose a player, no matter how important. And so this weekend will be tough in that respect, because now you're asking people to be perfect that maybe you haven't asked that out of before. But it's going to be a big time test for them this weekend, no question.
The one thing that I thought about immediately for this weekend is that I hope that the fans that are going, who were going to see Jordy, still stick around to watch Nebraska.
Yeah.
Because one person doesn't make the team, and there are a lot of good ball players on this team. And I thought in my head that maybe Nebraska would have one of these giant autograph sessions after the game. I hope it still happens. I hope the kids show up. It's a good group of student athletes.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful group of kids.
And I hope that this team doesn't get the short end of the stick because the star is gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll be interested. I assume Jordy's going to travel with the team. I don't know if that's the case or not at this point. Whether she does or doesn't, it is safe to say there's not going to be as bright a spotlight on Nebraska. I came into this year saying if Nebraska just added an average player, an average pitcher, they were still the favorite in the Big Ten. I sure didn't want to test that theory, but at the same time, as we kind of have the downer of losing Jordy Ball and the fact that it does probably bring down Nebraska's ceiling some. There's still big things out there for this program, and I'm sure they're talking about that. And I'm sure they're going to focus on it. That they're still probably the favorite in the Big Ten, if at least one of them. At least one of them. The person that we're going to talk to here in a little bit, Kaylin Kinney, has to be very good in the circle for that to be the case. And I think she can do it. I think she's come back from that injury very well. She's pitched pretty well to start the year, an ERA under 3. It's going to be a challenge for the Huskers to figure out how to get through the other 2 games of a series. And it's going to take some creativity from Rhonda Revelle and Lori Sipple to figure out exactly how to win at least one of those other 2 games. I think it can be done. But it's going to take them using their bullpen creatively and intelligently and mixing pitchers. And we saw some experimentation with that this past weekend with how they use Emerson Cope, how they use Caitlin Olensky, how they use Sarah Harness. And if they're able to maximize those 3, there's still a path to get them to the Big Ten title. Those 3 need to perform at a high level every time, most of the times that they get the ball. They're not going to be perfect.
No.
But I think those 3 have plenty that can get you through.
Well, listen, Kaylin Kinney of all the pitchers on this staff, minus Jordy, is the only one who's getting the strikeouts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a lot. She's got 14 on the year so far. But everyone else is a pitch to contact.
Yeah.
And let your defense work. So there's the other thing that needs to happen. The defense has to perform.
Yeah.
Can't afford. I honestly, the first weekend, thought Caitlin Kinney struggled a little bit at second base and got a little bit worried. I'm like, oh, she's ranked as a top 10 second baseman in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Maybe it's just first weekend jitters. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the defense has to perform for their pitchers because the pitchers are going to give up. They're going to give up some balls. Yeah.
The balls are going to be in play. I mean, Caitlin Olensky's whole deal is getting miss hits, pop-ups, that sort of thing. I'm a little surprised the strikeouts haven't been there for Sarah Harness as yet. Emerson Cope is interesting to me because she's pitched to contact, has a nice changeup, but she just seems to have a confidence about her, both offensively and defensively. And she seems, as you try to Frankenstein this pitching staff together and maximize what they can do, she feels like somebody who could slot into that closer role and do pretty well.
Yeah, she's someone I was really anxious to see, and we couldn't watch any of the games from New Mexico. So I know I texted you. I was like, how did Emerson Cope look?
Yeah.
Because I was really curious. And so going forward, especially this weekend, I have Flo just to watch this weekend. But
the true artists are on radio.
That's true. I can listen to you.
Okay.
And watch the video stream.
Okay.
As long as your internet stays running out there. And
as long as my voice holds up, and this is not a good sign right now. But hey, you know what? I've got 2 days to rest up. I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be at full throat. But yeah, this weekend's gonna be a nice test for Nebraska softball. You're facing, teams that were regional championship, College World Series type teams last year, but also, teams that seem a little vulnerable. You talked about UCLA. They're off to
oh my gosh,
disappointing. There's been a hole in that bucket since about April of last year.
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on it. That UCLA has as much talent as anybody in the country other than Oklahoma. But there's something that just hasn't clicked there for a while. And it's kind of concerning, if you're a UCLA fan, that it's not clicked.
Yeah, and for my other job, I'm covering UCLA pretty regularly, and I've watched every game so far. But for them, their pitching staff is so young. Even Taylor Tinsley being their ace, she's only got 1 year under her belt.
Yeah.
Jada Cecil transferred in from UCSD and just hasn't translated from that mid-major to the pack.
The big stage, yeah.
And so it's going to take a while for them to get going. But, Maya Brady finally started hitting kind of the same thing, but they also had a big injury.
Yeah.
In almost the same fashion, except it wasn't a pitcher. It was their number 3 hitter in the lineup, though. And so Alexis Ramirez went down on a weird play in right field, and she's out indefinitely. They're not saying what it is, but she went down holding her knee.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it happens. It happens. And it's UCLA. I would be worried for next year because Taylor Tinsley's going to have another year under her belt.
Yeah.
But then I look at the other side and Jordy will be back next year.
Right. Yep. Well, we've got plenty of year to talk about this year, and we've got a great Husker to talk to, somebody pitching her final year for Nebraska. Kaylin Kinney, Nebraska's pitcher, now pushed into a bigger role because of the Jordy Ball injury, and I had a chance to sit down with her after the weekend in New Mexico.
We are 2 weeks into the season, and the Huskers have just wrapped up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, going 4-1. They are 6-3 on the year, and in the circle for the Big Red is Kaylin Kinney, a senior out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And Kaylin, first off, you had a heck of a journey just to get to this year. The broken hand last year. You also had a knee injury you found out about. How good does it feel just to be out there in the circle competing on a daily basis?
Yeah, it just feels awesome. I mean, like you said, I've been out for a while, so just having the opportunity to be back on the field with the rest of the team and just be competitive has been amazing. And I'm just excited the rest of the season to see where it takes us and just to keep competing while on the mound.
Of course, last year you pitched the first month of the year. You injured your hand, I think, the first weekend of the year. Pitched a couple more weeks, decided you couldn't go any farther. So you had to sit all of March, all of April, all of May. How tough was that for you as somebody who usually is in the thick of it?
It was tough. It was really tough, but they did an article on me recently, and I kind of spoke about it there, but just the support system that I have within the team, the staff, my parents, my friends, everyone is just, it's incredible. I mean, I didn't really know that because I went in for my second x-ray and I didn't know that my season was going to end. I thought it was going to be, I might have to sit out for a couple weeks, but then I need surgery. So it was one of those things where it was just kind of a bang situation. And, I think just having a really great support system, and that was probably the best thing that came out of it, was realizing how strong I am mentally and also physically, but also having the support system behind me the entire way.
Had to be very tough, though, rehabbing and not being able to be out there with your teammates competing. Of course, you were still along with the team. What do you think you learned about even playing the game of softball, having to sit out and watch?
I've said this to Coach Ravel too, but just knowing, I've came to a realization of how much I love the game because it was taken away from me, and how passionate and how I really appreciate the game that much more. And I don't know, I just learned a lot of things from viewing and the perspective of just watching the game and how the girls play and just the interactions and what things really make a difference when competing on the field. So it just gave me really big eyes to see softball in a different perspective.
Now, you're coming to the end of your Husker career. You came here in 2021. How do you feel like you've grown from the time you arrived in Lincoln to now?
I, as a human being, I've grown a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. I've gained a lot of different characteristics that I didn't come in to Lincoln with. So that's one way. And also as a softball player, I just think my IQ has gone up, my ability, just everything physically, but also mentally, especially mentally. I mean, coming in, I was a worrywart, anxious, but I've just kind of grown into a lot more confident and poised softball player, but also individual.
You talk about being able to control your emotions a little better and not worrying as much in the circle. How did that process occur for you, and when did it kind of click?
I think it just came to a point where I was tired of the feeling and tired of, like, they told me when I first came in that I would just run back to the mound, and I had no idea. So I think it was a lot of work on realizing, like, self-awareness and how I'm working when pitching or even in the batter's box. So just kind of being more self-aware and be able to realize when I'm speeding up and stuff like that. So I think that, and also just maturing as an individual and just realizing that, like, it's a game. It's a big, huge part of my life. At the same time, ultimately, it's still just a game. So
Chatting with Kaylin Kinney, the Nebraska pitcher on behind the plate with Maren and Nate. And Kaylin, you've had two mentors in the program basically your entire time. Courtney Wallace, who wrapped up her career last year, now a graduate manager. Olivia Farrell, now a full-fledged assistant coach, but she wrapped up her career while you were in the program. What'd you take from both of them?
I took bits and pieces from both of them. I mean, they're both great competitors, both great softball players, and obviously pitchers, but just the way that they competed, the way that they handled themselves under pressure, and just the way that they led. They were both captains for, I think, 1 or 2 years that I was here, and just the way that they were able to handle themselves in the circle, but also able to lead the team has really been inspiring and just something that I've looked up to, and they've always been team first. So, and that's the way that I want to go about playing the game, and being a captain now, that's the way I want to lead the team too. It's whatever the team needs, and that's what they provided, and that's my goal too.
You're a captain now, and leadership emerges for different people at different times. What are you doing more of this year as a captain that maybe you weren't doing earlier in your career? Are you more vocal, more focused on the example you're providing? What are you doing more of now as a captain that maybe wasn't a focus for you before?
Well, I'm a very, like, internal person. Like, I'm not very external. Like, I'm not very extroverted, I should say. So I think just being more extrovert in the way of communicating and just being, I wouldn't say even more vocal. I do like to lead by example, and I think I have done a pretty good job of doing that, but just being more vocal and being able to just communicate and really connect with the whole entire team, even the girls that are just coming in, just really getting to know them and getting to know how they are as human beings. And yeah, so building those relationships for sure.
Let's go back to when you joined this Husker program and you were trying to figure out where you were going to play college ball. You're from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, so you're a regional kid, but not necessarily an in-state kid. What stood out to you about Nebraska that made it where you wanted to play your college softball?
Well, my very first visit was Nebraska, and then I went on some other ones, but I also set a SAR goal, but I always knew that Nebraska was where I wanted to be. Just the way that the coaches handle themselves, just the way the program is and has been for years, and just the way that the university treats their student athletes, and just the type of family feeling you get from stepping on campus is just, I mean, I didn't get that feeling anywhere else. And also I really loved how it's only 4.5 hours away from home. I'm a big homebody, love my family, love my dogs. So having the ability to go home and have them come watch my games was a huge part of it. And also just the fact that it was the only visit that I went on a visit with other girls within my class. And 5 out of the 6 girls all ended up committing to Nebraska that I went on my visit with. So I already started to build those relationships with those girls, which I thought was really cool.
So you conclude your visit. Did you all kind of talk yourselves into who all was on that visit with you, and how did it come about that you all ended up at Nebraska?
Well, I think Abby Newland committed on her visit. So I remember that happening. I was actually the last one of the group to commit, but then I think Miley Jo committed, which she's no longer with us, but I shouldn't say no longer with us, but she's no longer on the program. Yeah. But and then who else was on the visit? I'm trying to think. Oh, Camille, which she also medically retired, and then I can't think of the other one. And then it just came along where we just communicated. It was like we had a group chat, and it was like, oh yeah, I just committed, or I'm going to commit. We'd always just have that communication, or like, we're excited, let's figure out our dorm room, what it's going to look like, stuff like that. So it was just building those relationships, because I committed my freshman year. So we had about 3.5 years to build those relationships. So then we got to campus, it was like we kind of already knew each other. So it was really cool.
And now, as we chat with Kaylin Kinney of the Nebraska softball team, your role this year has evolved even in the first 2 weeks of the year. I think coming in, you were penciled in as the number 2 pitcher and also hitting. The injury to Jordy Ball has increased your probable workload. How did you take in that news, and how do you react to it as you move through this season?
I think it's just one of those things where you just have to, I'm just going to do what I got to do. Team first, like I said before. So I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to help the team win and help them keep competing. So obviously Jordy going out it's an awful, awful situation. And I've gotten really close with her these past couple months with her being on the team. And I hope and pray that she has a fast recovery and that, that the Lord knows her plan and knows what's in for her. So, but yeah, I'm just excited to just keep working with the girls. Sarah, another great pitcher that's going to help take the load, and Caitlin, Olinsky, and Emerson are going to do everything they can too. So we have 4 very capable pitchers to help really get us through the season and really compete this season. So I'm really excited.
Now, we mentioned your role. You were penciled into the batting order, and you've been in and out of the lineup. How do things change for you when you are hitting and pitching as opposed to just pitching?
Yeah. I don't think necessarily things change right now in the box. I need to figure some things out clearly, but I think on the mound right now, I just feel confident, and I feel really confident in my movement, my pitches, just being poised on the mound, and I need to instill that in the box. So I don't think things necessarily change. It's just not showing up on one side of the ball right now. But other than that, right now on the mound, I just feel very comfortable and very like I can produce what I need to produce. So,
and your role even in the circle has kind of changed from somebody as a starter where you kind of expect you to go the whole distance to where it feels like this year Nebraska's really trying to mix pitchers, mix and match. What has been your process as far as getting used to coming out of the bullpen, coming into games as they're going on? How have you gotten used to that difference?
Yeah. I would say just taking if I'm coming into a game like I did today, just taking it as that's the first inning of the game from the get-go. No one scores, focusing on keeping it one pitch at a time. I think routine and staying consistent within your routine is huge. And just having the mindset of that you're going to attack and do what you do best, be the best competitor that you are in that moment is huge. And it's the same way with starting a game. When you're starting a game, you want to do everything. We always say, be the best you. So don't try and be something that you're not. So whether you're starting a game, coming in a game, or you're closing a game, you throw your best stuff that's going to help the team win, but also is going to help you perform your best. So,
and finally, we're coming into a tough part of the schedule. The Mary Nutter Classic next week, a very tough schedule in front of you there. Then you play Missouri and Wichita State, 2 very good teams. What are some keys for you to come through successfully that tough part of the schedule?
I think just keeping it one day at a time, one pitch at a time, one whatever at a time. I think the more you look ahead, the more anxious, the more you can get ahead of yourself. So just staying in the present moment and just working and continuing to work and continue to prepare. And the more you prepare and the better you work with the process, the better the outcomes. So I think just keeping it one step at a time and just staying in the moment is key.
Well, hoping that the outcomes are good for you. Good luck the rest of the way, Kaylin.
Thank you.
Kaylin Kinney, senior pitcher for Nebraska, and especially in the absence of Jordy Ball, somebody who's going to have a really big role for this team.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how she handles this spotlight and how she continues to perform for them in the circle.
Well, the Huskers are focusing on Kaylin Kinney as their ace because of the injury to Jordy Ball, and somebody who wrote a very eloquent article about losing a great player like that, a very eloquent column. Amie Just, the lead sports columnist from the Lincoln Journal-Star. And Amie joins us now here on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate. And Amie, first off, thanks for joining us. And how many words of profanity did you use when Jordy Ball went down with injury?
Oh man. So if you look through my texts with like my friends and coworkers, to quote one of my favorite movies, Mean Girls, the limit does not exist. It was a lot. I just watching. So I didn't watch the game, full disclosure. I was at the gym listening to your call.
Oh,
So I'm on the yoga mat, just like stretching out after a lift, and I hear your call, and I'm like, no, this is not happening. Like, and so just like the way you described it, and then when I saw the video later, I'm like, oh, she's just like probably tweaked her ankle, right?
Yeah.
No. So I was just so disappointed. I know so many other people were too, because this is, as I described in my column, it's like the Aaron Rodgers situation in New York. So much buildup, incredible amount of buildup, so much hype, sky high expectations, and then it's over before it even begins. And it's just so upsetting. Like, just as somebody who's a fan of sports in general and loves really good stories, this is not the story that you want. This is not what Jordy wanted, obviously. And it's just heartbreaking.
Yo,
Just
I'm
heartbreaking.
like tearing up again.
Hmm.
Like it made me tear up watching her go down. And I just, because my heart broke for her. And then Amie writes her column, and you made me cry again. And I'm not a Husker fan. I didn't grow up here. I, haven't followed the Huskers for my entire life, but I feel like the last couple years of being around the program, I've become a fan of theirs. I'm a fan of how they play the game, and I'm a fan of Jordy. So just to see all that happen, ugh.
Yeah. How does this injury? I mean, obviously this year now gets less focus from your general Husker fan, right? Your Husker fan that usually goes to baseball, not softball, that may flip on a game here or there. What does this do to the short-term interest as far as this year? And what do you think it does to sort of the long-range picture of Nebraska softball to the general fan, next year when ball comes back?
Yeah, so I think that with the increased demand of season tickets, I still think people are going to show up because, number one, they've already bought them. And number two, I mean, why not? Right? Like, you say that, you're a Husker fan and you're going to support them and this happens. Why wouldn't you still show up? Like, just knowing what this team was able to accomplish last year, right? Like, they were really good last year. Like, they have a strong foundation from what they did before. And yes, there are now more injuries to players outside of Jordy and Abby Squire. But I don't know why you wouldn't still show up for them. Like, I mean, if we have any more days like today, for example, it's 70 degrees in February. Like, why not? Go hang out. Maybe they win, maybe they don't, but it's still going to be a fun season. It's just probably going to be different than people expected it to be originally.
Yeah, I think one of my questions I have for people is about showing up, right? Because they've put in so much work to expand the stadium. So I know today general tickets went on sale.
Right.
So how many people do you think we're going to see that are coming out to sit in the berm, to sit in the bleachers, to the standing room only? Are we going to get there? What do you think?
I don't know. I hope so, right? Because Nebraska has shown immense support for every women's sport this year. I mean, some of the biggest crowds in soccer history for the special season that they had. You had a attendance record for PBA for a women's game. Now, granted, they were playing Iowa and Caitlin Clark, but still, there were a lot of Nebraska fans that wouldn't have been there without that too, right? You have all of the people that showed up for volleyball day in Nebraska who aren't normally at your, standard game in Devaney, because you can't get there to 60,000. So this is a way for people to show up, even though Jordy's not going to be playing this season. She'll still be around.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I still think it's a really good way for people to show up, even though it'll be different. And to a point that you guys made earlier, if it was going to happen, if she was going to get hurt, yeah, it sucks that it's the first game, but at least it won't be a question of if she'll get her medical red shirt. There's no denying that. Like, she's not losing the season. Now, if she got hurt like halfway through Big Tens, like, no, she'd lose the year. So if it were to happen, this is your best case scenario, because it's so early in the season that it won't take her, all the way through the off season. Like, she'll get a real off season to like train instead of just like rehab.
Yeah, that's fair.
Chatting with Amie Just of the Lincoln Journal-Star here on Behind the Plate. And I want to build on that a little bit because, yeah, it's a downer that Jordy gets hurt. There are at least some silver linings here from the standpoint of, one, she'll be almost certainly ready to go opening day next year. But two, you also have the idea that you have this year and next year to recruit with the idea of coming to play with Jordy. So you have this full recruiting cycle, and then the next one as well. Are there some silver linings that can be found here?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you've already seen it pay off with this last recruiting cycle with Bella, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was the pitch there. So I think that, that can work too. But then also you get 2 more years of, potentially having the roster to make a deep run in the tournament and potentially get back to the Women's College World Series for the first time in 10 plus years. Like, who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah. And like you said, with how much support women's athletics gets at Nebraska, it only makes sense that from the outsiders looking in, if they're looking to find a new home, or these high schoolers looking to find a program that they're like, oh, do you think we could play at Memorial Stadium one day? Like, is this going to happen for us? I mean, maybe, who knows? But Jordy gives them that shot, and she's got 2 more years.
2 years of spotlight and 2 years to be out front. Kind of my last question for you, Amie. What would be a successful season for Nebraska softball now? What if Nebraska softball does what? How do you see it? What would you see as a successful year now?
Stop having people get hurt, for one.
Yeah, I like that. Let's do that.
Can we start there?
Yeah.
We start there? I mean, at the start of the season, I loved their depth, and now it's pretty shallow. So,
Pretty shallow.
Getting people back is good. And then, if they win 1, maybe 2 games this weekend is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
Like, so even if they go over this weekend, which I don't think they will, but they could, it's a really, really tough schedule.
Yeah.
Don't let it affect them to where it turns into a spiral for the rest of the season. And how they respond after this weekend, I think, will be a good indicator of what this team is made of. I'm not going to read too much into this weekend unless they win a lot. Then I will read a lot into that.
Hopefully plenty of Husker fans do too.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, they're definitely in an interesting spot right now with so many people being hurt, including a whole heck of a lot of people who have played a lot of softball. So.
Yeah.
Something to fight through, something to work through. One last thing. How much buzz what do you anticipate buzz-wise for the home opener, Wichita State and Missouri? 2 good teams coming in. We'll see where Nebraska is record-wise. Where do you think that's going to be on people's sports menu in a week or so?
Well, I hope it's pretty high. The Haymarket area is going to be buzzing because it's, state basketball.
That's
so
true.
there's going to be a lot going on over there. But I don't think it'll be as bananas as it would have been if Jordy would have been throwing. But I still think there is this appetite for Nebraska softball. And I hope that I'm right.
We hope you're right, too, and we thank you for coming on. And next time, we want you to bring us to tears writing about Husker victories and triumphs instead of injuries. How about that?
Hey, I can only do so much. But if the victory is there, then maybe I can get there. How about that?
Perfect.
Okay,
Sounds good. Thanks for coming on with us, Amie.
Thanks, guys.
Amie Just of the Lincoln Journal-Star, and we appreciate her coming on. She does a great job covering Husker athletics broadly and Nebraska softball as part of that. And I am really interested to see the general Husker fan response. Like we've said, the Mary Nutter Classic's really tough.
Yeah.
And Nebraska's even at a geographic disadvantage with, say, 4 out of 5 that they play this weekend. Inarguably 3 out of 5. San Diego State, Fullerton, and UCLA. Oregon's probably the push. Utah, you could argue either way. So the record's not going to look that great. Or it may not look that great. Nebraska could surprise. But there's a decent chance the record isn't great as they come home. I hope the Husker fans understand, first off, they're a northern school getting up to speed. And second off, there's still a lot out there for this team. And if they show up at Bowlin to help them out, they can help them get a great season. And this is a team that could use your help.
Yeah. And, for this weekend specifically, I just want to see them fight.
Sure.
I want to see them fight. I'm not saying that the first 2 games weren't a fight. It was more of a shell shock response, I think.
Yeah.
But I just want to see them fight this weekend. If they come back 0-5, so be it.
Yeah.
But if they don't get run ruled in more than one game, I think that's moral victories.
Yeah.
And with the injuries, I think moral victories are okay here, especially when you come back and you have Wichita State and Mizzou. Mizzou is a very good team.
Yeah, Mizzou's gotten off to a great start this year.
But the one thing with those games ahead, Jordy has made it very clear that she came back to grow softball in the state of Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
You know where I'm going with this with Wichita.
Yeah.
They have a lot of Nebraska kids on that roster. So if you want to bring your kids, you want to support the Nebraska grown players, that's your opportunity.
Yeah. Addison Bonner, the Beatrice native and All-American in her senior year, among others, for Wichita. Let's broaden our scope a little bit as we hit the home stretch here of our first episode of the season, the Big Ten Conference. And I've been dubious about the Big Ten's strength thus far. I think that this league, unfortunately, has kind of performed as I thought it would, from the standpoint that, Penn State has probably exceeded my expectations.
A lot of people's expectations.
Yeah. But, you felt like it was kind of a down year for the league last year. And then there are graduation losses, substantial graduation losses at Northwestern. And you also have transfer losses. Taryn Kern leaving Indiana for Stanford. Nia Carter leaving Iowa to go play for Arkansas, among others. And I hate to say it, but I feel like the league has taken another step back this year, at least from the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree. Another name that sticks out to me is Jaden Vickers, who left Rutgers for Kentucky. You see all of these names that did such a great job for this conference and helping build it. I believe from my discussions with some of the Iowa folks, Iowa just didn't have the money to keep Nia Carter for another year, because it's her COVID year.
Yeah.
So she ends up at Arkansas. But it blows my mind that these student athletes come in, they have these great years, and then they leave.
Yeah.
So
And that's something that's going to have to change in this league if they're going to establish anything in softball. And perhaps that's where Washington, Oregon, UCLA helps the most, is the idea that you just added 3 marquee teams to this conference. But it's on the rest of this conference to then step up and say, okay, we're going to spend NIL money to keep great players at our schools and to compete with Washington and UCLA and Oregon and continue to go out and have a chance to win at the highest level. And I'm waiting to see where that commitment is from some of the other Big Ten schools. Flat out, I think it's there from Nebraska. I think from an NIL perspective, from a broader experience perspective, you've got a pretty good package at Nebraska. There are other places in this league that are like that too, but I don't know that it's as widespread as it needs to be if this conference is to take a step forward and stop being a feeder conference for the other big conferences.
yeah. I would look at Wisconsin. That's another Peyton
Sure.
Monticelli, right? She
Yep.
goes from Wisconsin to Oklahoma.
Right.
And then you watch Wisconsin and Florida over the weekend. Just if that's the marquee Big Ten program for that tournament, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And that tournament was crazy in and of itself with all the scoring. I mean, it was
So much.
unbelievable. All the double-digit run games. And then most of that tournament was rained out because weather in Clearwater is variable. But, you talk about Penn State. Penn State is very interesting to me because, of course, they lose Bailey Partial, their elite pitcher. Maybe this is a sign that program is here to stick around because they've gotten great pitching to this point. They're 7-0. I don't know that they've played the toughest schedule in the world, but at the same time, losing a player like Partial at a program like that, usually that cripples you. Instead, they've come out and played really well to this point.
Yeah, they have. And they're led by Bridget Nemeth, a freshman.
Yeah.
Who is doing great things for them right now. But yeah, I'm just not I feel like every week we record this podcast, we're like, I'm not sold on them.
Right.
I'm not sold. And like you said, their schedule, it's not like they went out and played all the top talent. Yes, they played Arkansas. They beat Arkansas.
Yeah, and that's a nice win.
That's a good win.
And it'll gain value as the year goes on.
Yes, it will. But you look at the rest of their schedule, and they got rained out over the weekend too. They were also in Florida at a different tournament, but Coastal Carolina, Kansas. They played Ohio the week before. FAU, I think that's a good win for them.
Yeah.
FAU also just beat Michigan.
Yeah.
So, okay wins. The one so far is Arkansas, but then you look at the rest of their non-conference, and you've got St. Francis, Liberty, Morgan State, Penn, Hofstra, Tarleton. Yeah. They do play Texas, and I think that one game against Texas, because let's face it, Texas is legit.
Yeah, Texas is there this year.
If they can fight with Texas, maybe they are for real.
Yeah. That'll be a nice indicator. One team I had my eye on in preseason was Indiana.
Yeah.
Because they brought back basically everybody except Taryn Kern, and that's a huge loss. I mean, you lose your best player, that's a big loss. But they're 8-2. I feel like they've played a reasonably good schedule and come out 8-2 against it. Are we buying Indiana as kind of the next team up in the Big Ten?
Honestly, I am.
Okay.
I think Brianna Copeland is one of the best players in this league. And she's going to be where the responsibility falls.
Yeah.
And as long as she's doing well, then Indiana's going to do well. They lost to Gardner Webb. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, former Nebraska graduate assistant Mackenzie Steele is their pitching coach. So little Husker tie there.
But I think I'm buying into Indiana right now.
Yeah, I think they're going to be in the mix for the long haul. Michigan, let's talk a little bit about them. 6-3, elite pitching. I mean, Lauren Durkowski's as good as it gets.
She is.
But what is going on with that lineup?
They don't have that. She doesn't have the help around her.
Yeah.
She can't do it on her own.
Right. She can't win a game 0 to -1. And this isn't Big Ten football where you might get a safety or a pick six. Michigan the last 2 years has had pretty extreme lineup problems. I mean, they were not a very good offensive team last year, and then they lost a bunch from last year's team. So I'm concerned as to the direction of that program. And I know Bonnie Thal is in her second year as Michigan's head coach, and it's so tough to take over for a legend like that and make the program your own and keep things going. But it just seems to be going in the wrong direction for them in a hurry.
And I don't know how long they give Bonnie the reins when it's moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah. It could go either way there. It could be, hey, we trust you. You're one of ours. And, it's not football. It's not men's basketball where you can be a little trigger happy. Or, you look at Duke. Marissa Young's a Michigan grad. I mean,
could happen.
Yeah, that's pretty tempting. But that'll be a storyline throughout the year because for so long Michigan has been the benchmark of this conference, and Northwestern has usurped them in that respect the last few years, and where that offense is just so rough right now. I don't know, if they don't start hitting, it just becomes a spiral unto itself because the pitchers go, well, I'm not getting run support there. And then the offense is going, well, you guys couldn't score any runs last year. Why, what's going on? And so that I am interested to see where Michigan goes. And we've talked with Nebraska quite a bit of, hey, it's 2 weeks in. And that's the case. And certainly with Big Ten results at this point in the year, there's always a disclaimer of, they're coming down to play south. They're coming down south to play teams that have been outside and teams that can be farther along. But that's a concern right now that Michigan's going to have to answer. How do you get your offense going? So that's something that I'm looking at right now. Anything else catch your eye on the Big Ten?
Northwestern. Yeah. I think we've got to hit Northwestern before we wrap this up. And they lost so much.
Yes, they did.
They lost their core that took them to the World Series.
Yeah.
And they're going to be out in California this weekend too.
Yeah.
So I think we'll be able to see what Northwestern really has this weekend. They've done all right so far. They haven't played the best schedule. Now they got rained out in Clearwater.
Yeah.
So we couldn't see what that was like, but they're scoring a lot of runs, and but so are their opponents.
Yeah, and with all the losses on their pitching staff, they're going to have to win games pretty high scoring, but it feels like this year is going to be that sort of year in college softball where the offenses hold sway over the pitching staffs. Well, we'll get a very good look at the wide picture of college softball this week at the Marionette Classic, where Nebraska, among others, is playing, and we'll talk about it next week here on Behind the Plate with Maren and Nate. Hopefully I've got a full voice for the next one. For Maren Angus Combs, I'm Nate Rohr. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.